Just close it now. If you are coming back here open, you will see. No, I'll close it now. Close it for good and go back to your country. This is South Africa. We don't need you.
Sisi, hello. How do you work here? How do you work here? There's no colored people here working here, and it's only you guys working here. Why don't you employ colored people? Only you, Zimbabweans. It's only we have been here. Each and every time we have qualification. It's not this skills brought it to win here. We've been working here with no colours working here. Why only you Zimbabweans here? We are reporting to your immigrants. You're gonna come here.
As the South African government, I want to make it clear, we have taken a firm stance against any form of intimidation, vigilantism, or violence directed at people from other countries or other nations or other.
It doesn't appear that the South African authorities are responding to the magnitude that one would expect them to do.
The law is clear. Private citizens cannot decide who may work, trade or remain in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa says immigration enforcement belongs to the state. His government has announced arrests, prosecutions, immigration operations and diplomatic interventions. Yet Ghana's President John Mahama and the Chairperson of the African Union Commission say the intimidation still appears to continue with too little consequence. So the question is no longer whether South Africa has responded. It has. The real question is whether that response is working. The first clip shows a business operator being ordered to close and leave South Africa. But the video does not establish the operator's nationality or immigration status. It does not prove that the business is unlicensed. It does not show an investigation by Home Affairs, the police, a municipality or a labour inspector. What it does show is a private person attempting to impose a punishment. The second clip raises a serious economic grievance. The speaker believes that Zimbabwean workers are being employed while local coloured residents remain unemployed. They allege that employers use migrant workers because they provide cheaper labour. That allegation should not simply be dismissed. South Africa has a severe unemployment crisis. Employers who exploit undocumented workers, avoid labour standards or pay people below legal rates should be investigated and prosecuted. However, this video does not prove that these particular workers are undocumented. It does not establish what they are paid. It does not show whether South African applicants were unlawfully rejected. And it does not give a private citizen the authority to threaten anyone with deportation. There are two different questions here. Are immigration or labour laws being broken? And who has the legal authority to investigate? When private citizens collapse those questions into one, legitimate frustration becomes vigilantism. And South African law is not ambiguous on this point. In November 2025, the Gauteng High Court ruled against unlawful practices associated with Operation Dudula. The court confirmed that only authorised immigration and police officers may demand passports or identity documents to determine whether someone has the right to remain in South Africa. Private individuals may not conduct immigration raids, intimidate suspected foreign nationals, force businesses to close or remove people without lawful authority. The ruling did not abolish immigration enforcement. It placed that enforcement where it belongs, with the state. President Ramaphosa repeated the same principle in June 2026. He said that no private person may stop someone in the street and demand proof of nationality. That protection is not only for migrants. A South African citizen with a foreign accent can be targeted. A refugee carrying valid documents can be assumed to be undocumented. A permanent resident can be ordered out of a workplace, and someone legally entitled to remain can still be threatened by a person with no authority to inspect anything. The rule of law exists because legal status cannot be determined by appearance, language, or public anger. The 2025 High Court judgment confirmed that immigration enforcement is reserved for authorised state officials and restrained unlawful identity checks, intimidation, and related vigilante conduct. Ramaphosa's 7th of June address likewise stated that only authorized government officials may act against immigration law violations. It would be inaccurate to say that the South African government has done nothing. Cabinet approved a 5-part migration strategy in June. It includes stronger enforcement of immigration and labour laws, tighter border management, reform of the immigration system, changes to legislation, and greater cooperation with other African governments. Police, Home Affairs, labour inspectors and the courts have since conducted large-scale operations. The latest cabinet update, released on 30th of July, reported that by 23rd July, an earlier government briefing said the caseload included unlawful conduct, intimidation, incitement, and related offences. That demonstrates real state activity. But there is a serious limitation in the way the figures are presented. The published totals combine different migration-related offences. They do not provide a clean breakdown showing how many arrests concerned undocumented migration, how many involved employers breaking labour laws, how many concerned public violence, and how many involved people intimidating migrants or pretending to exercise immigration powers. That distinction is fundamental. Arresting an undocumented migrant is not the same as protecting a documented worker who is being threatened. Processing deportations is not the same as prosecuting someone who unlawfully closes a migrant-owned business. Both may involve migration, but they answer different legal problems. The government's statistics show movement. They do not yet tell us whether the people organising intimidation are being consistently identified, prosecuted and deterred. Cabinet's 30th of July statement reported 205 criminal cases, 354 arrests and 107 cases on the court roll as of 23rd July. It also reported extensive immigration enforcement and repatriation activity. The 12th of July Inter-Ministerial Committee briefing described cases involving unlawful conduct, intimidation, incitement and related offences, while reaffirming that private searches and identity checks are illegal. Hear him out.
The statement, the official statement, is that we condemn that. We do not support that statements. But at the same time, we see that these people who are harassing, our African fellow citizens are free to do whatever they want,
Youssouf acknowledges that Ramaphosa and International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola condemned the intimidation. His criticism is not that Pretoria has failed to speak. It is that the official position does not appear to be producing reliable protection on the ground. He alleged that people in uniform have sometimes been present while harassment continued. That allegation should be investigated. It should not automatically be treated as established fact, but it exposes the weakness in the government's public case. Arrest totals are not the same as completed accountability. The public still does not know how many alleged perpetrators were formally charged, what charges were brought, how many cases reached trial, how many resulted in convictions, were organisers investigated or only people present during individual incidents, and what happened where officials allegedly stood by without intervening. Until those details are published, the deterrent effect cannot be properly measured. Listen to Ghanaian President.
It doesn't appear that the South African authorities are responding to the magnitude that one would expect them to do. It's become something they are doing with impunity at very high cost to us.
Mahama says Ghana has already organised charter flights to return citizens from South Africa. He argues that people encouraging or driving the intimidation appear to operate with impunity. He also says the consequences now reach far beyond individual confrontations. People have abandoned businesses. Families have returned home. African governments have paid evacuation and reintegration costs. And a domestic South African crisis has become a continental diplomatic dispute. Ramaphosa responded by sending a delegation led by Ronald Lamola to Ghana. Mahama said Ghana had no hostility towards South Africa. He wanted the matter discussed by the African Union so that South Africa could explain what it was doing and the continent could search for a lasting solution. That is an important distinction. Ghana is not formally arguing that South Africa has no right to enforce immigration law. It is arguing that enforcement must not coexist with apparent impunity for people who intimidate Africans because of their nationality. Ghana's presidency confirmed Mahama's meeting with the AU Commission chairperson, the 3 charter flights, and Ramaphosa's dispatch of a special envoy led by the foreign minister. It also recorded concern about apparent impunity despite South Africa's public condemnation. This is what President Ramaphosa said.
We must not conflate lawful migrants, refugees and asylum seekers with people who enter or remain in countries in violation of immigration laws. Nor should migrants or people from outside the country be made to be scapegoats for unemployment, crime or shortcomings in the delivery of public services.
This is probably Ramaphosa's clearest statement of the government's position. He accepts that unmanaged migration can create genuine concerns about sovereignty, security, employment and public services. But he rejects blaming migrants collectively for South Africa's unemployment, crime or failures in public administration. His proposed balance is straightforward: firm immigration management, human dignity and the rule of law. In principle, that position is difficult to dispute. South Africa has the right to control its borders. It has the right to investigate unlawful employment. It has the right to prosecute employers who exploit vulnerable workers. And it has the right to deport people who have no lawful entitlement to remain, provided proper legal procedures are followed. But a constitutional government cannot outsource those powers to whichever movement arrives at a shop, workplace, clinic or school and declares itself the community's immigration authority. Therefore, the government's credibility depends on whether it can do 2 things at the same time: enforce immigration law against genuine violations, and enforce criminal law against intimidation, assault, unlawful eviction and vigilantism. Doing one without the other will not restore public trust. Ramaphosa's 27 July Pan-African Parliament address condemned intimidation, vigilantism and violence, distinguished lawful migrants from irregular migration, and rejected migrant scapegoating. So, is South Africa enforcing the law? On policy, the answer is clear. The government rejects vigilantism and says immigration enforcement belongs exclusively to authorized institutions. On activity, the answer is also clear. There have been arrests, criminal cases, court proceedings, immigration operations, labour inspections and diplomatic engagements. It would be false to describe the state as completely silent or inactive. But the third test is deterrence. And that is where the evidence remains incomplete. A threatened worker does not experience an arrest statistic. A shopkeeper ordered to close needs immediate protection. A family deciding whether to abandon its livelihood needs confidence that the police will intervene. And a government claiming that perpetrators will face the law must eventually show not only arrests, but charges, trials, convictions, and protection for victims. Given all these, the most defensible conclusion is this: South Africa has established a clear policy and taken measurable action, but the government has not yet publicly demonstrated accountability and deterrence strong enough to close the gap between the law and what threatened people continue to experience on the ground. That is why Ramaphosa can truthfully say his government is acting, and Mahama can still credibly argue that the response does not match the magnitude of the problem. Those claims are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They describe 2 different levels of the same reality. One is government policy in Pretoria. The other is what happens when a private citizen enters a workplace and tells someone, "You are going to be deported." South Africa does not have to choose between secure borders and human dignity. It does not have to choose between protecting local workers and protecting migrants from intimidation. A lawful state can investigate employers, enforce immigration rules, and defend citizens' economic interests without making nationality a substitute for evidence. The test is no longer whether the government can deliver another forceful statement. The test is whether the next person ordered out of a shop or workplace can depend on the state to intervene before the threat becomes a destroyed livelihood or another flight leaving South Africa. Do you believe the government is now doing enough? Or is the real problem still the distance between policy and enforcement? Keep the discussion focused on evidence, law, and accountability. No collective blame or attack in the comments. The South Africa File.